With all but one Week 13 game in the books Monday Night Football, we've learned a little bit more than we knew last week. Or, in some cases, thought we knew. Players impressed, players disappointed, and there is fantasy football fallout to unpack. Once again, I've compiled the full weekly fantasy stock report below. These are the most notable risers and fallers coming out of Week 13. Invest accordingly. Stock up at RB. Bucky Irving, Bucks. In his first game back from a massive 8-week absence, Bucky Irving scored 15.1 fantasy points on the back of 81 yards, 19 touches, and a rushing touchdown. That makes double-digit fantasy points in all 5 games he's played in 2025. And he should theoretically only get more efficient and explosive the further he's removed from injury. Irving has an amazing schedule down the stretch and has quickly re-established himself not just as a fantasy starter, but a strong RB1 and a potential league winner. Kyle Monangai, Bears. The Chicago Bears, their offense and particularly their run game, have been firing on all cylinders lately, and it was particularly evident on Black Friday when Kyle Monangai and DeAndre Swift combined for 255 yards and 2 touchdowns on 40 carries versus the Eagles. This duo has broken into the true Ben Johnson legacy tier, the successor to Sonic and Knuckles, and other duos from Detroit backfields past. As the goal line back in half of the committee in recent weeks, Monangai is now a must-roster fantasy asset and is startable as a flex in typically sized leagues. Quinshon Judkins, Browns. After a stretch of iffy games on either side of the Week 10 bye, rookie Quinshon Judkins has now scored 14-plus fantasy points in consecutive games, with 156 scrimmage yards, 2 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. He's the entirety of the Browns' offense, which might mean more on a better team, but still comes with a strong RB2 floor based on volume alone. Importantly, he has great matchups with the Titans in Week 14, the Bears in Week 15 and the Bills in Week 16. He will likely be a borderline top 10 back over that stretch and could carry fantasy teams through the playoffs. Stock up at WR. Jakobi Meyers, Jaguars. Somehow, after all the turnover and turmoil, it looks like Jakobi Meyers might be the top wide receiver in Jacksonville. He's logged 6 targets in 3 straight games and 4 of his last 5, recorded 50-plus yards in 3 straight and has now found the end zone in back-to-back games. He was the most productive receiver for the Jaguars by far on Sunday, mostly due to a brilliant 50-yard catch and run and then an immediate follow-up touchdown. With Brian Thomas Jr. busted to a historic degree, Travis Hunter out and Parker Washington banged up, Meyers might have a decent WR3 floor for the rest of the year, including 2 juicy games against the Colts. A.J. Brown, Eagles. For anyone who bought into Philly's squeaky wheel after his highly publicized Twitch comments, congratulations on all the grease. A.J. Brown has seen 33 targets over the last 3 weeks, catching 25 of them for 291 yards and 3 touchdowns. He scored 21 fantasy points in Week 12 against Dallas and 30.2 against the Bears on Black Friday. And while he has a tough matchup on deck with the Chargers, he and Philly get the Raiders and Commanders in the ensuing 2 weeks. Brown is being force-fed the ball right now, and is far too talented to allow that volume to go to waste. He's a borderline WR1 again, until proven otherwise, with probably one more inexplicable dud yet to come. Chris Godwin Jr., Bucks. A quick look at Chris Godwin's fantasy box score these last 2 weeks off of injury might be discouraging. Just 9 targets and 5 catches, even with Emeka Egbuka starting to fall off. But it was really nice to see him flash on Sunday, specifically taking his 3 catches for 78 yards, all of which hit for 20-plus yards individually. He also dropped a would-be touchdown that would have made his Week 13 excellent, and should correct those kinds of fluke mistakes in the future. With Egbuka's struggles and Godwin's returning health, it's not impossible he ends up being Tampa Bay's WR1 again through December. Stock up elsewhere. Kyle Pitts Sr., Falcons. Kyle Pitts Sr. has been admittedly up and down all season, with Sunday marking his 3rd double-digit fantasy outing, interspersed with more than a handful of 2 to 6-point games. But, all things considered, there aren't many tight ends who can claim multiple games with 8 or more targets, 4 now on the season, and at some point, the touchdown fortune has to swing Pitts' way. He has a couple excellent matchups on the docket, including Seattle next week, and can be streamed in a pinch after an encouraging Week 13 with Kirk Cousins. Brenton Strange, Jaguars. A tight end who's been far less swingy, but just hasn't had a full chance to break out for fantasy, is Brenton Strange. In 6 full games this season, Strange has topped 40-plus receiving yards 5 times, and he finally scored his first touchdown of the year on Sunday against the Titans. He seems to be in the mix for Trevor Lawrence's favorite looks once again, after returning from a 6-game injury absence, and could get better as he gets healthier down the stretch. He also has 2 matchups against the Colts, one this coming week, that should make him a strong TE1 streamer consideration. Stock down at RB. Isaiah Pacheco, Chiefs. If you held on to Isaiah Pacheco through his injury, hoping he'd come back and justify his preseason draft capital, it's time to give up. You can drop him, outside of deep leagues where you stash him as an attrition back, after he took his 5 touches for 33 yards against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving. This is Kareem Hunt's backfield, and really it's Patrick Mahomes' offense, with very little consistent or explosive run game to speak of. Pacheco hasn't hit 12-plus fantasy points in a game all season, and I don't expect him to anytime soon. He's nothing more than a change of pace back and can be sent to the waiver wire if you need to make a move. Saquon Barkley, Eagles. This isn't Saquon Barkley's first appearance in the stock down section of this column, but it's time for another reminder. He's been bad. Not just, he's not quite MVP caliber Saquon from 2024, he's scored single-digit fantasy points in 3 straight games and has only topped 12 points once in his last 7 contests. He's not seeing 20-plus touch volume with any consistency and is not efficient enough to be an RB1 with the lighter workload. This is not uncommon for star running backs off massive seasons, but it's to the point we need to consider benching him for less heralded RB2s on a weekly basis. As an example, Judkins should get the nod over Saquon for at least the next couple weeks, and possibly the rest of the year. Rico Dowdle, Panthers. Yeah, that whole Rico Dowdle's backfield thing from a few weeks ago. That dream is disappearing fast. As Chuba Hubbard has gotten healthy, Carolina has gone right back to a full-blown committee. They were able to pull off an upset win over the Rams while giving Hubbard 19 opportunities to Dowdle's 20, and Hubbard was more effective as both a rusher and receiver on Sunday. We're now likely looking at a hot hand approach rest of season, and Carolina won't be in a position to run the ball 38 times every game. That means only one of these backs will likely crack RB2 territory any given week, and it'll likely be hard to predict which. Dowdle is still startable, he's just not the borderline fantasy star he seemed to be back in the middle of the year. Stock down at WR. Ricky Pearsall, 49ers. Yikes. If you had held on to Ricky Pearsall through his long injury absence, waiting excitedly for a triumphant return after his hot start to the year, I have bad news. 3 straight games with fewer than 5 targets, fewer than 3 catches, fewer than 20 yards and fewer than 3 fantasy points. And he's heading into a Week 14 bye. You should drop him in shallower leagues, and while you can stash him away through the bye and into a great end-of-season schedule in deeper leagues, hoping that he gets healthy and bounces back, that's largely blind hope at this point. Emeka Egbuka, Bucks. We can't turn our eyes away any longer. Emeka Egbuka is just not great anymore. Through his first 5 games, he averaged 17.98 fantasy points per game, scored 5 touchdowns and was torching defenses on the deep ball with ease. In the 8 weeks since, he's topped 8 fantasy points just once, averaged just 7.7, scored just 1 touchdown and has been wildly inefficient even with a strong target share. With Godwin now getting healthy, Egbuka might even lose some of the volume that had kept him in the borderline WR3 conversation. Hindsight is 20/20, but he's been benchable for the vast majority of the past 2 months. It's time we started actually benching him. Justin Jefferson, again, Vikings. As it turns out, Max Brosmer was not the answer to Justin Jefferson's QB woes. Instead, he finished Sunday's game with an abysmal 2 catches for 4 yards on 6 targets. That's 1.4 fantasy points. He's been in this section of the column recently, so I won't recapitulate everything that's gone wrong, but he's not a WR1 or a WR2. Heck, he's rarely a WR3. An absolutely incredible stretch of matchups might bring some hope heading into the fantasy playoffs, but Jefferson needs a functional quarterback to produce, no matter how bad the opposing secondary is. Good luck if you're relying on him down the stretch. You're going to need it. Stock down elsewhere. Jake Ferguson, Cowboys. Around Week 7, at the tail end of CeeDee Lamb's absence and a stretch of absolute dominance from Jake Ferguson, it looked like the Dallas tight end might have cracked the Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, George Kittle tier of true elites at the position. Alas, in the 5 games since, Ferguson has not hit double-digit fantasy points a single game, has scored a TD just once and is ultimately averaging fewer than 6 fantasy points per game, including a bagel in Week 8. George Pickens and Lamb are too voluminous and productive to allow a solid ceiling to a third pass catcher, and Ferguson has plummeted to the bottom of TE1 range as a result. He can still be played as a streamer, but is more in the conversation with Pitts now than he is with McBride or Bowers. Justin Herbert, Chargers. Justin Herbert looked like Superman in the middle of the season, putting up more than 20 fantasy points week after week despite an embattled offensive line. But the constant pressure and hits have gotten to the Los Angeles QB. Literally, he broke a bone in his non-throwing hand in Week 13, and he simply cannot produce at a fantasy-friendly level behind this line. Herbert has fallen short of 15 fantasy points in 3 straight games, none of which were difficult matchups. He has the Eagles, Chiefs and Texans on his remaining schedule, and should not be played in any of those contests outside of 2 QB leagues. You can stream him against Dallas in Week 16 maybe, but that's it. Otherwise, he's out of starter territory until further notice.